The rain started just after 11. Not the soft kind of rain that helped people sleep peacefully. This rain hit the windows like tiny stones thrown from the sky. The streets of Chicago looked empty, cold, and forgotten. Inside a small apartment above an old grocery store, Daniel Rivera sat at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread in front of him. The lights flickered once. Then again. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes and looked toward the bedroom where his 8-year-old daughter Sophia was sleeping beside her little brother Mateo. They shared the same bed because Daniel had sold almost everything else after his wife died 2 years earlier. He whispered quietly to himself. "I'm trying, Elena. I'm really trying." Every night he said those words to his late wife as if she could still hear him. The apartment smelled faintly of soup because Daniel had stretched one pot across 3 days. His work boots rested beside the door, soaked from the long shift at the warehouse. His back hurt. His hands hurt. His heart hurt even more. Tomorrow morning, he would probably lose his job. He already knew it. His boss had warned him twice this month for arriving late after taking Mateo to school and Sophia to her doctor appointments. Life did not care about schedules anymore. Life only demanded more and more from him. Daniel stared at the final notice from the landlord. 3 months behind. 1 more week before eviction. He lowered his head into his hands. Then someone knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. At midnight. Daniel froze. Nobody visited him anymore. Not this late. Not in this neighborhood. Another knock came. Louder this time. His chest tightened. Carefully, he stood up and walked toward the door. He looked through the cracked peephole. And his blood nearly stopped. Standing outside in the rain was Victoria Langston. His boss. The owner of Langston Logistics. The richest woman Daniel had ever met. She wore a long black coat soaked by rainwater, and her silver car waited at the curb with headlights glowing through the storm. Daniel immediately panicked. Had he been fired already? Why would she come here herself? He opened the door halfway. "Ms. Langston." Victoria looked directly at him. Her face was unreadable. Then she quietly said, "Say that again." Daniel blinked in confusion. "What?" "The words you just said before you opened the door," she replied softly. "I heard you through the hallway." Daniel's face turned red. He remembered whispering to Elena. "I'm trying." He looked embarrassed and lowered his eyes. It was nothing. But Victoria did not move. Rainwater dripped from her coat onto the floor. "No," she said. "It wasn't nothing." And in that moment, Daniel had absolutely no idea that this midnight knock would completely change his life forever. If you love emotional stories about kindness, sacrifice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Corner of Kind Choices, like this video, and leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel continue sharing stories that touch hearts around the world. Daniel stepped aside nervously. "Please, come in." Victoria entered slowly, looking around the tiny apartment without saying a word. Daniel suddenly became painfully aware of everything. The cracked walls. The old furniture. Mateo's tiny shoes near the heater. Sophia's drawings taped to the refrigerator. He felt ashamed. At work, he always tried to look strong and professional. He never wanted anyone to know how badly he was struggling. Victoria noticed the stack of bills on the table. Then she noticed the children sleeping in the next room. Her expression softened slightly. "You live here with your kids?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." "Alone?" Another nod. "My wife passed away." Victoria became silent. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm sorry about being late lately, Ms. Langston. I know I've disappointed you. If this visit is about firing me, I understand." Victoria slowly turned toward him. Do you really think I came here at midnight during a storm to fire you? Daniel didn't answer. Because honestly, yes. That was exactly what he thought. Victoria removed her wet gloves carefully. Tomorrow morning, the board of directors wants me to lay off 20 employees. Daniel's stomach dropped instantly. I see. But before I decide, she continued, I wanted to understand something. Daniel looked confused. What? Victoria glanced toward the children's room again. You. The room became quiet except for the rain outside. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. There's nothing special about me. Victoria gave a sad little smile. That's where you're wrong. Daniel didn't know how to respond. Victoria slowly walked toward Sophia's drawings on the refrigerator. One showed a stick figure family holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Another had the words, "My dad is my hero." Victoria stared at it for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, how long has it been since your wife died? 2 years. And you've raised them alone since then? Yes. How? Daniel laughed bitterly. I honestly don't know. Victoria looked at him carefully, almost studying him. At work, Daniel was invisible to most people. Quiet. Hardworking. Always exhausted. Never complained. Never asked for help. But tonight she saw something else. A man carrying the weight of the world without letting his children feel it. Daniel walked toward the stove. I only have cheap coffee, he said nervously. That's fine. As he prepared the coffee, Victoria noticed his hands trembling slightly from fatigue. You should sleep, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. Parents don't really sleep. For the first time that night, Victoria almost laughed. Then her expression darkened again. My father used to say the same thing. Daniel handed her a mug. You never talk about your family at work. There's a reason for that. She sat at the tiny kitchen table. Daniel sat across from her carefully, still unsure why she was there. Victoria stared into the steam rising from her coffee. When I was 12, she began quietly, my father lost everything. Daniel listened silently. He owned a transportation company. Small business. Honest business. But one bad year destroyed him. She paused. We lost our house. We lived in one room for almost a year. Daniel blinked in surprise. He had never imagined someone like Victoria Langston understanding poverty. She continued softly. One night I woke up and heard my father crying in the kitchen. It was the only time in my life I ever heard him cry. Daniel swallowed hard. Victoria looked directly at him. Tonight, before you opened the door, I heard that same pain in your voice. The room suddenly felt smaller. More personal. Daniel looked away. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Don't apologize for loving your family. Those words hit Daniel harder than he expected. Because lately, everyone made him feel like a failure. The landlord. The school. His supervisors. Even strangers. But nobody had said something kind to him in a very long time. Victoria reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. She slid it across the table. Daniel looked down carefully. Then froze. It was not a termination notice. It was a promotion. Warehouse operations manager. His eyes widened. What is this? You've earned it? Daniel stared at her in disbelief. There must be some mistake. There isn't. But I've been late. You've also covered extra shifts, trained new workers, helped injured employees, and refused overtime pay when the company struggled last winter. Daniel blinked slowly. You noticed that? Victoria looked almost offended. I notice everything. Daniel felt emotion rising in his throat. But why me? Victoria leaned back quietly. Because kindness matters. Daniel looked confused. She continued. 3 months ago, one of our janitors collapsed outside during a snowstorm. Most employees walked past him because they were rushing home. She paused. You stayed. Daniel remembered immediately. The old janitor named Mr. Green. You sat beside him for 2 hours in the hospital after your shift, Victoria said. You missed your bus. You walked home in freezing weather. Daniel shrugged awkwardly. He was alone. Victoria nodded slowly. Exactly. Daniel suddenly realized something. You investigated me. Only after that day. Why? Because people reveal their true character when nobody is watching. The rain outside softened slightly. For a moment neither spoke. Then Sophia appeared sleepily in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. Daddy. Daniel stood immediately. Sophia, go back to bed, Carino. But Sophia looked toward Victoria curiously. Who is she? Daniel hesitated. Victoria surprised him by kneeling slightly to Sophia's level. My name is Victoria. Sophia smiled politely. Are you Daddy's boss? Victoria smiled gently. Yes. Sophia looked worried instantly. Is Daddy in trouble? Daniel's heart broke hearing that question. Children understood more than adults realized. Victoria looked at Sophia carefully before answering. No. Your father is one of the best men I've ever met. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes unexpectedly. Sophia smiled proudly. I know. Then she yawned. Victoria laughed softly. Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Sophia walked away slowly, then stopped. Daddy. Yes. Mommy used to say kind people are rich even without money. The apartment became silent again. After Sophia disappeared back into the bedroom, Victoria whispered. She sounds like her mother. Daniel nodded quietly. She does. Victoria stood up slowly and looked around one last time. I'm going to take care of the eviction notice. Daniel's eyes widened. No, I can't ask you. You didn't ask. I can pay it eventually. This isn't charity, Daniel. Then what is it? Victoria looked directly at him. It's investment. Daniel frowned slightly. In what? In a good man. Daniel had no words left. After years of struggling alone, after months of feeling invisible, someone finally saw him. Not his failures. Not his poverty. Him. Victoria walked toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back one final time. My father died believing the world had forgotten kindness, she said softly. Tonight you reminded me he was wrong. Then she stepped into the rain and disappeared into the night. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway long after her car was gone. For the first time in 2 years. He cried. Not because life was cruel. But because someone had finally been kind. 2 months changed everything. Not all at once. Not like magic. But slowly, quietly, the way sunrise replaces darkness without anyone noticing the exact moment night disappears. Daniel Rivera no longer walked through life with his head lowered. The bills were finally shrinking instead of growing. Sophia smiled more often. Mateo talked endlessly about dinosaur shoes and becoming a rich paleontologist. Their apartment still had cracked walls and old furniture, but now laughter lived there again. And somehow, that mattered more. At Langston Logistics, workers respected Daniel deeply. Not because he was a manager, but because he never forgot where he came from. When employees struggled, Daniel listened. When someone made mistakes, he taught instead of humiliating. When people worked overtime, he stayed beside them instead of hiding upstairs in an office. And little by little, the warehouse changed too. People became kinder. More patient. More human. Marcus noticed it first one night during break. "You know what's weird?" he said while sipping coffee. Daniel looked up from paperwork. "What?" "Nobody's fighting anymore." Daniel laughed lightly. "This is a warehouse, Marcus. Somebody always fights." "No, seriously," Marcus insisted. "Before you became manager, everybody acted angry all the time. Now people actually help each other." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe people are just tired." Marcus pointed at him. "No. It's you." Daniel immediately shook his head. "It's not." "It is." Daniel hated attention like that. He never saw himself as important. But kindness has a strange effect on people. It spreads quietly. One person softens, then another, then another. Like light moving through darkness. Upstairs, Victoria noticed the changes too. Productivity had improved. Employee complaints dropped dramatically. Workers who planned to quit stayed. One executive even joked during a meeting. "Maybe we should promote more exhausted single fathers." The room laughed. Except Victoria. She looked directly at the executive. "Or maybe we should stop underestimating kind people." The laughter died instantly. After the meeting, Victoria stood alone in her office staring through the giant windows toward the warehouse floor below. Daniel was helping a new employee learn inventory systems. Patiently. Calmly. Most managers would have rushed. Most managers would have gotten irritated. Daniel treated people like they mattered. Victoria found herself watching him more and more lately. And that terrified her a little. Because after years of building walls around herself, she suddenly cared about someone again. One evening, Daniel stayed late finishing reports when he heard soft knocking on his office door. Victoria entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Daniel smiled. "You're starting to spoil me, Ms. Langston." She handed him the cup carefully. "Victoria." He hesitated. "What?" "You can call me Victoria." Daniel looked uncomfortable immediately. "That feels dangerous." She laughed softly. "It's just a name." "Yeah," he said nervously. "But expensive names usually come with consequences." Victoria smiled wider than usual. "You're funny when you're tired." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm always tired." For a moment they sat quietly in the small office while workers finished loading trucks downstairs. Then Victoria noticed a framed photograph on Daniel's desk. Elena. His late wife. Holding baby Matteo. Victoria picked it up gently. She was beautiful. Daniel's expression softened instantly. She was kind. The way he said it carried so much love that Victoria suddenly felt guilty for asking anything else. But Daniel surprised her. She believed every person deserved dignity, he said quietly. Even strangers. Victoria returned the photo carefully. "She sounds rare." She was. Daniel stared down at his coffee. "After she died, I became angry at the world for a while." Victoria listened silently. "I stopped believing people cared about each other." He gave a small sad smile. "Then one night my boss knocked on my door during a storm." Victoria looked down modestly. "You make me sound better than I am." Daniel shook his head immediately. "No. You reminded me who I used to be." Those words stayed with Victoria long after she returned home that night. Her mansion felt colder than usual. Huge rooms. Perfect furniture. Silence everywhere. She poured herself a glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, she walked into her late father's study for the first time in months. Everything remained untouched. Bookshelves. Old papers. His glasses resting beside a lamp. Victoria slowly sat in his chair. Then whispered into the empty room. "I think you would have liked him." Tears filled her eyes unexpectedly. Because Daniel reminded her of the version of her father that existed before life broke him. Honest. Warm. Human. The next morning, everything changed again. Daniel arrived at work and immediately sensed tension in the building. Employees whispered nervously. Marcus rushed toward him. "There's trouble." Daniel frowned. "What happened?" Marcus lowered his voice. "The company might be sold." Daniel's stomach tightened instantly. "What?" "Big corporation from New York." Fear spread through the warehouse quickly. Everyone knew what that meant. Layoffs. Automation. Cuts. Daniel immediately headed upstairs. Victoria stood inside the boardroom arguing with several executives when he arrived outside the glass doors. "We can't continue rejecting this offer," one man insisted. "It's billions." "And what happens to the workers?" Victoria asked sharply. "They'll retain some staff." "Some." "Victoria, this is business." Daniel quietly stepped away before they noticed him. For the rest of the day, anxiety filled the warehouse. Employees worried openly. Some had worked there 20 years. Others had families depending on those jobs. Daniel tried calming people, but honestly, he was scared too. Late that evening, Victoria entered his office looking exhausted. "You heard?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Is it true?" She closed the door behind her. "The board wants to sell." "And you?" Victoria looked out the window. "I built this company with my father." Her voice weakened slightly. "Selling it feels like burying him twice." Daniel remained quiet. Victoria laughed bitterly. "The funny thing is, they keep telling me not to make emotional decisions." Daniel looked directly at her. "Maybe emotional decisions are sometimes the human ones." She turned toward him slowly. "You really believe that?" "Yes." Victoria crossed her arms. "If I reject the sale, the board may remove me." Daniel stared at her carefully. "You know what your father would choose." Those words hit deeply. Because she did know. But knowing the right thing and surviving it were different battles. Victoria sat across from him heavily. "I'm tired, Daniel." He noticed then how lonely she looked beneath all the power. Not rich. Not strong. Just lonely. Without thinking, he spoke softly. "You don't have to carry everything alone." Victoria looked up quickly. Neither moved. The silence between them suddenly felt fragile. Honest. Dangerous. Then someone knocked loudly outside. Both immediately pulled away from the moment. Marcus opened the door halfway. "Sorry," he said awkwardly. "But there's a family downstairs asking for Daniel." Daniel frowned in confusion. A family. When he reached the lobby, he froze. Luis. The truck driver who collapsed months earlier. Beside him stood his daughter Elena and several other workers. Luis smiled emotionally. "We came to thank you." Daniel looked embarrassed immediately. "For what?" Luis laughed softly. "For changing this place." More workers gathered nearby. One woman stepped forward. "When my husband lost his job, you secretly paid our electricity bill." Another nodded. "You bought winter coats for my kids." Marcus grinned. "You thought nobody knew." Daniel looked completely overwhelmed. "I didn't do those things for attention." "We know," Luis said gently. "That's why they mattered." Then little Elena stepped forward holding a small wrapped box. "This is for you." Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a simple wooden plaque. Handmade. On the front were carved words. "Kindness makes strangers become family." Daniel's eyes filled instantly. Around him, hardened warehouse workers stood quietly emotional too. Victoria watched everything from upstairs through the glass walls. And suddenly, for the first time in years, She understood something her father once tried teaching her. A company was not trucks. Not buildings. Not profits. It was people. Real people. Downstairs, Daniel cleared his throat emotionally. You all already had kindness inside you, he said softly. I just reminded you. Marcus shook his head smiling. No, brother. You lived it? That night, after everyone left, Victoria remained alone in the boardroom. The city lights shimmered outside the windows. On the table sat the billion-dollar sale proposal. She stared at it for a very long time. Then finally picked up a pen. But instead of signing the sale, she wrote her resignation. The next morning the board exploded with outrage. You're making a catastrophic mistake, one executive shouted. Victoria stood calmly at the head of the table. No, she said quietly. For the first time in years, I'm making the right one. You're throwing away billions. Victoria smiled faintly. My father once lost everything except his humanity. She gathered her papers slowly. I won't lose mine for money. And with that, she walked out. By afternoon, rumors spread everywhere. Employees panicked. Then confused silence filled the warehouse when Victoria called everyone together. Hundreds of workers gathered nervously. Daniel stood near the front beside Marcus. Victoria took a deep breath. Effective immediately, she announced, Langston Logistics will not be sold. The room erupted instantly. Cheers. Applause. Some people cried openly. But Victoria raised her hand gently. There's more. The room quieted again. I've spent years believing leadership meant standing above people. She looked toward Daniel briefly. I was wrong. Daniel looked confused. Victoria continued. This company survives because of kindness, loyalty, and human dignity. Not fear. Then she turned toward Daniel fully. Which is why I'm announcing our new director of operations. Daniel's eyes widened instantly. No. Absolutely not. But Victoria smiled softly. Daniel Rivera. The warehouse exploded again. Marcus nearly tackled him with excitement. Daniel himself looked completely stunned. I can't. Yes, Victoria interrupted gently. You can. Tears filled Sophia's eyes later that night when Daniel told the children. Matteo screamed. We're super rich now. Daniel laughed so hard he almost cried. Sophia hugged him tightly. Mom would be proud of you. That sentence broke him completely. Because after years of surviving, failing, struggling, and hurting, maybe she would. A week later, Daniel stood outside the apartment building holding boxes while movers carried furniture downstairs. Victoria approached beside him quietly. You ready? Daniel looked at the old building one last time. So many painful memories here. And good ones too. He smiled slightly. Yeah. The children ran around excitedly near the moving truck. Victoria watched them warmly. Then Daniel turned toward her seriously. You changed our lives. She shook her head gently. No, Daniel. Her eyes softened deeply. Kindness did. For a moment they simply stood together beneath the evening sunlight. No wealth. No titles. No walls. Just two wounded people who helped each other remember humanity still existed. And sometimes, that becomes the beginning of everything. Months later, a sign appeared inside Langston Logistics near the entrance for every employee and visitor to see. It read, in this company, people matter first. Underneath, in smaller letters, one act of kindness can change a life forever. Employees passed it every day. Most smiled when they saw it. Because they knew it was true. Somewhere out there, someone is exhausted. Someone feels invisible. Someone believes the world has forgotten kindness. Be the person who proves them wrong. Because kindness is never small. A gentle word can save a broken heart. A helping hand can restore hope. And one moment of compassion can completely change someone's future. Thank you for watching this story on Corner of Kind Choices. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And remember, the world changes slowly. One kind person at a time. The house became painfully quiet after the truth came out. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that feels heavy. The kind that follows heartbreak. For 3 days, Camilla barely spoke to Sebastian except when necessary. She still helped him move around the house out of habit, but the warmth in her eyes had disappeared. That hurt him more than anger ever could. Matteo stayed confused about everything. One moment he wanted to hug Sebastian. The next moment he looked scared and distant. But Lucia changed the most. She became silent. Not cold. Not cruel. Just quiet. And somehow, that silence broke Sebastian's heart more than anything else. He missed her endless questions. He missed her little footsteps running through the hallway. He missed hearing her laugh while teasing Matteo. Now she spent most of her time in her room drawing quietly beside the window. Sebastian wanted desperately to fix everything. But some wounds cannot be repaired with quick apologies. One evening, Rosa found him sitting alone in the dark dining room. "You finally learned something important," she said softly. Sebastian gave a bitter smile. "That I'm an idiot. That fear makes people selfish." He lowered his head. "I became the kind of person I hated." Rosa sat beside him slowly. "No," she replied. "The kind of person you hated never felt guilty." That stayed in his mind long after she left. The next morning, Sebastian made a decision. He cancelled every remaining part of the fake scandal immediately. Lawyers announced publicly that the investigation against his company had been false information spread by corrupt competitors. His financial assets were restored publicly. The media changed its tone overnight. Suddenly, reporters praised him again. Business partners returned. People who disappeared began calling non-stop. And Sebastian realized something disgusting. The world respected wealth far more than honesty. But inside the house, none of that mattered. Camilla still looked wounded. The twins still looked uncertain. Money could restore reputation. It could not restore trust. That afternoon, Sebastian entered Lucia's room carefully. She sat on the floor coloring a picture quietly. "Can I come in?" She shrugged softly without looking up. Sebastian sat slowly nearby. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he noticed the drawing. It showed a bridge with cracks running through it. Tiny people stood on opposite sides. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Lucia kept coloring silently. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. "When I was little, my father lied to me a lot." Lucia glanced at him briefly. "He promised things and disappeared constantly. After a while, I stopped believing people stayed." His voice trembled slightly. "And after Elena died, I think part of me stopped believing love stayed too." Lucia listened quietly. "But what I did to you and your family was wrong," he continued. "Fear is not an excuse." Lucia placed her crayons down slowly. "Mom says when people are hurt, they sometimes hurt others accidentally." Sebastian swallowed hard. "She's right." Lucia finally looked directly at him. "But you still hurt us." "I know." Tears filled his eyes. "And I would do anything to take that pain away." Lucia studied him carefully with the strange wisdom children sometimes carry. Then she asked softly, "Are you telling the truth now?" "Yes." "All the truth?" "Yes." She remained quiet for several seconds. Then she nodded once. "Okay. Not forgiveness." "Not yet." but maybe the first tiny step toward it. That night, Sebastian heard Camilla crying softly on the back patio. He found her sitting alone wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness. For a moment, he almost walked away. But then she spoke without turning around. "You can sit if you want." He sat carefully beside her. The silence between them felt endless. Finally Camilla whispered, "Do you know what hurt most?" Sebastian answered honestly. "That I didn't trust you." She shook her head slowly. "No." He looked confused. "What hurt most was realizing how much pain you carry inside yourself." That answer surprised him completely. Camilla wiped tears from her face. "You were so afraid of being abandoned that you created the very thing you feared." Sebastian stared at the ground. "I know. I loved you before the money," she whispered. "And the children loved you before understanding what money even was." He closed his eyes painfully. "I was stupid." "You were wounded." Her voice remained soft. "But wounds don't disappear by hurting others." Sebastian felt tears rising again. "I don't expect forgiveness." Camilla looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she answered honestly. "Because forgiveness takes time." Then she stood and went inside. But before entering the house, she paused briefly. "You should still come to Mateo's school play tomorrow." It was a small thing. Tiny. But to Sebastian, it felt like someone opening a locked door slightly. The next day, Sebastian arrived at the elementary school feeling terrified. Parents filled the small auditorium holding cameras and flowers. Children ran everywhere wearing costumes. Mateo played a tree in the school play. A tree. And somehow he was still extremely excited about it. Sebastian sat quietly near the back, unsure whether he even deserved to be there. Then Lucia approached him holding a folded paper. "What's this?" he asked. "A ticket." He frowned slightly. "For what?" Lucia gave the tiniest smile. "For another chance." Before he could respond, she walked back toward Camilla. Sebastian nearly cried again. The play itself was chaotic and adorable. Children forgot lines constantly. One little boy sneezed so hard his fake mustache flew into the audience. Mateo took his role as a tree extremely seriously. Every few minutes he waved dramatically for no reason. The audience laughed warmly. And for the first time in weeks, Sebastian laughed too. Halfway through the performance, Sebastian noticed Lucia sitting alone near the side curtain looking upset. He approached quietly. "What happened?" She held up her drawing sadly. "A corner had ripped accidentally." "It's ruined." Sebastian examined it carefully. "No," he said softly. "It's just damaged." "There's a difference." "A big difference." He smiled gently. "Some things become even more special after being repaired." Lucia looked at him thoughtfully. Then she whispered, "Like families." Sebastian's throat tightened. "Yes," he answered carefully. "If people truly care enough to fix them." Lucia stared at the torn drawing again. Then, very slowly, she leaned against him. It lasted only a few seconds. But to Sebastian, it felt like sunlight after years of darkness. Weeks passed slowly after that. Healing did not happen magically. There were still awkward silences. Still painful conversations. Still moments when Camilla looked uncertain. But little by little, things changed. Not because Sebastian bought gifts. Not because he used money to fix problems. But because he finally began showing honesty consistently. He attended Mateo's soccer practices. He cooked terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings. He apologized sincerely whenever difficult conversations arose. And most importantly, he listened. Really listened. One afternoon, Lucia found him working in the garden. "You missed a spot," she announced seriously. Sebastian looked down at the uneven flowers and laughed. You're right. She knelt beside him quietly. After a moment she asked, why do adults think money makes people stay? Sebastian thought carefully. Because money can attract attention. But not love. No, he whispered. Real love stays when there's nothing to gain. Lucia nodded thoughtfully. Like Mom. Yes. And like us. Sebastian's eyes filled instantly. Yes, he whispered again. Like you. A month later, Sebastian organized something unusual. Instead of throwing a luxury gala after restoring his company's reputation, he used the money to renovate the children's wing at Camilla's hospital. New beds. Bright walls. A family support center. Playrooms for sick children. When reporters asked why, Sebastian gave a simple answer. Because kindness saved my life when money couldn't. The story spread quickly online. People praised him. But Sebastian no longer cared much about public admiration. The only opinions that mattered sat beside him at dinner every night. During the hospital reopening ceremony, little patients ran excitedly through colorful hallways. Parents cried with gratitude. Doctors smiled in disbelief. Camilla watched everything silently. Then she turned toward Sebastian. You didn't put your company logo anywhere. He shook his head. Helping people shouldn't always be advertising. Camilla stared at him for a long moment. Then finally, for the first time since the truth came out, she took his hand willingly. Sebastian looked at her in shock. Camilla smiled softly through tears. This version of you, she whispered, is the man we fell in love with. That night, the family walked home together beneath warm city lights. Matteo ran ahead pretending to be a superhero. Lucia held Sebastian's hand tightly. And Camilla walked beside him quietly. No luxury cars. No reporters. No performances. Just peace. When they arrived home, Lucia suddenly tugged Sebastian's sleeve. I need to show you something. She ran upstairs and returned carrying the old drawing. Families stay together. But now something had changed. The paper had been repaired carefully with tape and tiny colored hearts around the tear. Lucia smiled proudly. See? Sebastian stared at it emotionally. It's stronger now. Lucia nodded. Because broken things can still become beautiful. Sebastian could no longer hold back tears. He hugged her tightly. And this time, he understood something that would change him forever. Kindness is not weakness. Trust is not foolishness. And love, real love, does not disappear when life becomes difficult. Sometimes, it shines brightest exactly there. 1 year later, Sebastian and Camilla finally got married. Not in a giant palace. Not in front of celebrities. But in a small garden surrounded by family, hospital workers, neighbors, and children whose lives had been helped through the foundation Sebastian created afterward. Matteo cried loudly during the ceremony because he thought all weddings required dramatic emotions. Lucia walked proudly beside Camilla carrying flowers almost bigger than herself. And when the vows ended, Sebastian knelt beside the twins. I need to ask you both something too. Matteo gasped dramatically. Another wedding. Everyone laughed. Sebastian smiled through tears. No. He looked at both children carefully. Would it be okay if I became your father officially? Matteo jumped into his arms immediately. Lucia hugged him seconds later. And Camilla cried harder than anyone. Years later, people still talked about Sebastian Alvarez as a successful businessman. But that was never the thing that truly defined him anymore. What defined him was the children's hospitals he funded quietly. The scholarships he created for struggling families. The way he treated workers with dignity. And the fact that every Sunday morning, despite being a billionaire, he still made terrible pancakes for his family. Because a little girl once taught him something priceless. Sad people need someone smiling at them. And sometimes, the smallest hearts teach the biggest lessons. Thank you for watching this story here on Corner of Kind Choices. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Money can buy comfort. Success can buy attention. But kindness changes lives forever. So before you leave today, try to do one small act of kindness for someone. You never know whose broken heart might need it most.